Lasting and deep personal relationship networks can be worth millions, and it is through personal networks that businesses usually are started. Growing your personal network is one of the best and most cost-effective ways to grow a business. We are going to talk about how to build a valuable personal network on this ScreamingBox Podcast. Please like our podcast and subscribe to our channel to get notified when the next podcast is released.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
ScreamingBox Technology and Business Rundown!
What is the key to building a $1 million business? Building and maintaining larger personal networks. But how do you do that in today's busy world? Welcome to the ScreamingBox Technology and Business Rundown Podcast. In this podcast, I, Dave Erickson, and my co-host, Botond Seres, are going on an adventure with Mike Brcic, CEO of Wayfinders. Mike founded and built Sacred Rides, the world's #1 mountain bike adventure company, and in 2019 he sold it. Since then, he started Wayfinders and has spent most of his time developing incredible and impactful events, writing articles for his new blog series for entrepreneurs, and working on a new talk about the science of connection and belonging. Today, we are going on an adventure with him to discover how to build and grow a personal business network that is beneficial to everyone, how to use technology to schedule and maintain connections, and how can connections with people really strengthen a business. So, Mike, let's start with mountain biking. Tell us about that business.
Yeah, so I guess I can go back to the beginning and tell you about when it started. I had just graduated university and moved to a little ski town in the Canadian Rockies. Promptly got fired from my first 3 jobs and realized that I both didn't like and was not very good at working for others, and decided I needed to start out on my own. And it's funny, I've heard a lot of, I know a lot of entrepreneurs, and I've heard a lot of similar origin stories where they just, either they realize they really don't like working for others, or they're just bad at it, or something like that. And so I think some of us get into this world just by default because we've run out of options. And so I was walking along this little trail in the ski town after having been fired from my 3rd job, wondering what the hell I was going to do. And my friend said, "Well, you love mountain biking. Why don't you just see if you can take some people out on the local trails and see if they'll pay you to guide them around?" And I thought, hey, that's interesting. And I managed to secure a $10,000 startup loan from this local organization, bought a little fleet of mountain bikes, and hung up a sign on the highway. And I won't bore you with the details. It was a slow first few years, but then it really took off in year 4. And it eventually became a company that I expanded all over the world, 45 different countries by the time I sold it, and staff of 50 plus people around the world. And it was a real labor of love. I probably could have made a lot more money doing other things, but it was a wonderful lifestyle business and got me traveling all over the world and riding my bike. And there were many, many days where I just couldn't believe that I was getting paid to do this and getting to travel the world with my bike. So I'm really grateful for that business in that time.
Yeah, as a mountain biker of the last 35 plus years, I definitely love the sport, and I even at one point was in the industry for 10 years. But that also I found turned my sport into a job. And so after 10 years, it was like, okay, I need to go back to just enjoying it versus working it. But, the love of mountain biking is a great thing. And to start a business doing it, I think we both had that experience. So that is always a positive experience when you can take something that you really are enthusiastic about and turn it into a business. But as you learned, it turns it into work instead of just play.
It is
So
definitely
it's good to get back to just playing with it.
Yeah, it is definitely a double-edged sword. And I think, my mistake with that business, I think, was getting, I don't know if it was a mistake, but I really had these ambitions to grow it all over the world. And I went from a beautiful lifestyle business to bringing on investors, massively expanding the team, and going from spending my days on a mountain bike to spending my days in spreadsheets and writing shareholder reports and and one day I just woke up and was like, what am I doing? Like, this is not what I set out to create. And this is not the business I want to run. And that was sort of the beginning of, the decision to sell the company.
And with Wayfinders, how did that start?
So if I go back to 2016, that was when I did my final money raise. And that was the beginning of a really big expansion of the company. And as the company was expanding and I was bringing on all these staff, and I was trying to figure out how to run a global company with this big hierarchy and everything. I was really finding myself in over my head a lot of the time, and so I started joining these different entrepreneur groups and going to different entrepreneur events. And the events I went to, I learned a ton, but the real value I got was in the connections that I made with other entrepreneurs. And most of these events were not really set up for that, because there was lots of speakers on stage, lots of workshops, and then you're kind of running back and forth between some keynote speaker and then a workshop, and then maybe there's a 15-minute networking break in the hallway. And so I realized I wanted to create something that I felt was missing, where the focus was on connection, not on information. And I knew from my mountain biking company that when you take people outside and you're doing fun, challenging things together, that people tend to connect, really deeply. And so I wanted to create an event that had some of that, some speakers and some workshops and information, but mostly it was just about people having fun and connecting and pushing themselves. So my first event was in the Canadian Rockies. It was 5 days, and we were mountain biking, we were hiking, we were doing some rafting, we even did some heli biking on that trip. But then we also had some workshops, before dinner, after dinner, stuff like that, a lot of peer sharing, and people just loved it. And they asked me to do more of them. And I didn't really start it, as a company. It was just, let's do an event and see what happens. And people just asked me to do more of them. And so I decided then that I would really, get completely out of the mountain biking company, and that I wanted to focus on this. And so there was a period there of about 1.5 years where I was running both companies, but at the same time trying to sell Sacred Rides, which, that's kind of almost like another company in itself. It's almost a full-time job trying to sell a company. So it was a very busy time, but I'm really grateful that I was able to manage that and be able to sell my company and focus on what I'm doing right now, which brings a lot of joy into my life.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely amazing. So I think you brought up a really important point there, Mike, is a lot of these events are just about information, and that's probably the prime reason why I tend to not like them very much. So it's always just go to this keynote, listen to this person, and then everyone is just gone, pretty much. But personal connections are very important, so I would very much just trade such an event for pretty much anything else. So I was wondering, like, how does this thing work? Is it, I assume it has to be smaller groups, like probably you can't really build personal connections with 1,000 people at a time. So what does an event of yours look like? Is it like dozens of people, maybe the hundreds tops, I would guess?
Typically around 25 to 30 people, which I've kind of experimented with different group sizes. And, my goal is for people to forge some really deep connections. And if you go beyond that, it can still be done, but it requires a lot more work. And I find with 25 to 30 people, you have a lot of diversity in the room, but you can still have that intimacy of, if we're spending 8 or 9 days together in some place halfway around the world, you're going to have a meaningful conversation with pretty much every single person on that trip at some point. And I'm going to see to it that you do as well. So I could walk you through a typical day, but maybe I'll preface that with saying, where I host my events is a big part of what I do. And so I don't host them at a conference center in Florida or in Texas or something like that. I host them in remote parts of the world. So I just got back a few weeks ago from the jungles of Uganda, where we stayed at this beautiful lodge on the edge of a mountain rainforest, and we were, hanging out with mountain gorillas and stuff like that. In October, I'm going to far western Mongolia, one of the most remote parts of the world there. And the cultures of the places that we visit are a big part of the sort of ingredient recipe. A big part of it is taking people out of their day-to-day and putting them in an environment that's so radically different from their own. Because I find that gets them in a mindset of like really questioning, the path that they're on, the life that they're on. Not necessarily that those are, that they're bad, but it gives them other perspectives to view it from. And so, to give you an example, like in Uganda, we might have like a morning meditation, and then we'll have breakfast together, and then we'll head out the door. And one of the days that we were there, we did like an 8-hour hike into the jungle and ended up at this beautiful waterfall. And then we got back, and we did a 2 or 3 hour facilitated group exercise in one of the meeting rooms there. And a lot of those exercises that I do, they're there to facilitate either connection or introspection and self-inquiry, and help people go a little bit deeper. And then we might have dinner, and then after dinner, maybe there's an after-dinner talk by one of the guests. And so it's kind of a mix of different things. There's the two main things that I'm looking for people to get out of it is new perspectives and new connections and deep connections. And I hear all the time, people say, these are some of the closest connections that I've ever made in my life, because I create an environment for people to just be real and be vulnerable and be authentic. And when you give them that invitation, then they tend to connect a lot deeper than just, talking about the weather or talking about work.
Yeah, that sounds amazing, honestly. First time I hear of such an event, like in my life. Where do I sign up?
It is pretty unique, and people tell me that all the time. They're like, I've never encountered anything like this in my life, and so I'm always trying to push the boundaries on what I'm doing, and like when we go to Mongolia, we're actually going to be living with a nomad Kazakh family. And we're going to be accompanying them on their fall migration from their summer grounds to their winter grounds. And we're going to be, building our camps along the way, and learning about nomadic life and riding horses and hanging out with the eagle hunters and stuff like that. So it's very unique. And if you want to sign up, it's at way-finders.com.
All right. So how does this work? So do you typically get requests from like 25, 30 people at a time, or is it individual signups, just looking for adventure and connection?
Yeah, it's individual signups. They're all entrepreneurs. They're people who own their own companies. These days on a typical event, it's about probably 3/4 returning people, and then the rest are typically referrals. I don't tend to get a lot of random. There is an application form on my website for sure, but most of the people who come are either I know them, I've invited them, or they're coming back for another event, or they've been referred by someone. So it seems to be, I look at marketing as the best marketing I can do is to really heavily invest in an amazing product or service, and I've really gone deep on that, on creating just amazing events that deliver a lot of value to people. And so I really don't do any traditional marketing. And my events are right now sold out all the way to the end of 2024. And so, yeah, and I, that's kind of been the process I've followed with all of my businesses is do your marketing through your product. Just create such an amazing product that other people are going to do the marketing for you. And I think people underestimate what's required of that. To get to that level where people are just going to like rave about you and talk to you about their friend, it's a pretty high bar, and you need to really invest in such a killer product that people are going to do that for you, and that has served me well.
Obviously, quality product is some of the best marketing, and I agree with you on that, and it does take a tremendous focus. But even then, there still needs to be kind of how do business relationships happen, and some companies can do this where they put together a small event for their executives or for potential clients. But building a professional network is something that even the small guys who are just starting a business need to focus on and do. So maybe we can talk a little bit about, what do you think, have you learned in building all these deep relationships? How can entrepreneurs start growing their personal network? What are things that they can start doing from the beginning, even if they don't have big budgets or anything like that?
Yeah, great question. I would say first off is making it a priority, recognizing that it has value and it's not just like a little side project, that this is it's not only a very valuable thing to do professionally for yourself, for your business, but it's also a valuable thing to do personally, right? And so, some of the relationships I have with my customers are some of my strongest and best connections I have with anyone. And that is to me very deeply fulfilling. And all the research points to relationships being one of the key contributors to a fulfilling and a healthy life, right? There's studies that show that chronic loneliness can have the same health effect as smoking 2 packs a day, right? And so if we want to have a rewarding relationship life, we need to invest in it. We can't just let it happen accidentally. So you need to make it a priority. And I'm a big fan of the saying that your calendar reflects your priorities. And so if you were to look at my calendar, I have time blocked off every week for connecting with other people. And that's time for calls with people who aren't near me. It's time for coffees, and it's time for lunches with the people who are near me. And that time is blocked off. And that is rewarding to me personally, but it's also a business investment. I know when I invest in those relationships that it comes back to me, manyfold. And but I think, from my perspective, I look at those relationships as how can I create value for others, and how can I invest in those relationships from a perspective of creating value from them. Not it's very easy to get into that mindset of like investing in your relationships so you can take, but I find that if I come at it from the perspective of giving first, that it tends to be richer, more rewarding, and I end up, interestingly enough, getting more in the end because people can sense that I'm coming at it from that approach. So, just to sum that part up, it's making sure your calendar reflects that. And it's just like, my assistant handles a lot of that now, but before that, I would have time, on Mondays, I would have a couple hours blocked off for, I'm going to set up all my meetings with others, whether it's Zoom meetings or lunches or coffees or whatever. That's the time where I'm, creating the opportunities. And then I have time blocked off in my calendar for the actual connections with other people. So that's the first step. It's just recognizing it's a priority and making it a priority. The second, identify, who are the people that you want to invest your time with. And it's very easy to be reactive about this thing and just sort of reacting to opportunities that come your way instead of being intentional. Like, who are the people that I want to spend time with, or who are the types of people that I'm not yet connected to but I want to connect with, right? And so and we can get into the technology of how I manage it, but I have a database of all the people in my life that I want to stay connected to, both just personal friends and also business contacts, and then I make sure that I'm staying in touch with those people. And then also, in addition to these events that I do around the world, I also host local events for entrepreneurs, so dinners, meetups, all sorts of stuff. And that's just a way of, getting to meet more people, getting to invest in the relationships I do have, and continue to nurture them. So I look at it kind of, my focus is 80 to 90% nurturing the relationships I already have, and maybe 10 to 20% creating new relationships, because I already have, a lot of contacts and relationships. But for other people who maybe are a little more isolated, maybe it's more like 80, 90% creating new relationships. And we can get into, the meat of that, if you like. But, the starting point is just recognizing that this is somewhere to invest your time. It's gonna pay dividends personally and professionally, and don't look at it as a side project or a waste of time or something like that.
Yeah, I can truly understand that. For us, we're kind of in similar situation. We don't do a lot of marketing. our business comes is personal relationships, referrals, past customers who've gone to different companies and come back to us. And, but building that network, for me, I schedule every week meeting new people. It's really important that I do that. And it's really the follow-up and the maintaining of those relationships. So as an entrepreneur starts reaching out and building more relationships, maybe you can go into a little bit about what is that process, or what are the technologies that you would use to help manage growing that business. So not so much the outreach, but once you've talked to somebody, how do you grow your database, and then how do you maintain that so that you make sure you're having regular conversations, and what kind of conversations would you want to have anyways?
Yeah. Well, I guess, if you're like just starting out totally brand new in this, and, let's say you've moved to a new town and you don't know a lot of people and you're just starting out, and you want to build out your network, an obvious starting point is just find out what are the events already happening that are bringing together the types of people you want to connect with, right? And so if you're a programmer, you go to pretty much any big city, and there's going to be meetups of programmers and developers and stuff like that, and so you can go there. I always, with going to events, it's very easy to kind of get caught up in a transactional kind of thing. And I've been to lots of events where it kind of feels like everybody I'm talking to is sort of scanning the room to see like who they can mine for value type of thing. And that can be kind of off-putting. And so when I'm going to an event, I try to really approach it from a perspective of curiosity. Like I want to get to know the people in the room, and I want to be fully present to the people that I'm talking to. So I'm not looking over my shoulder to see who else can I talk to. So focus just on being really present with the people you're talking to. Be curious, ask questions. I like to ask interesting questions rather than like, what do you do, or stuff that doesn't really lead to interesting conversations. So I might ask people, if I meet somebody, I might ask them, what's exciting for you these days? Tell me what's got you excited. Or I might ask them, what's a challenge that you're stuck on these days? I really like, I find both with my, the events that I host and when I go to other events, storytelling is an amazing point of connection between people. We humans, we've been telling stories, around fires for hundreds of thousands of years. And so if I invite, if I give somebody an invitation to tell a story, generally they're going to take it. And if I show genuine curiosity in them, they're going to want to go a little bit deeper. So I like inviting people to tell a story about childhood or tell an origin story. So if I'm at an entrepreneur event, I might ask somebody, tell me how you got your start as an entrepreneur. Tell me how you started your company, right? And that's you sort of led off with that, asking me about my first company, and that tends to open people up. And the other thing, once you start meeting people, is you can host your own events, right? And that can be as simple as like having some people over for a barbecue. So, if you go to a developer conference and you meet 10 people and get their email addresses or contact information, you could send an invite. Hey, say I'm having a barbecue. I'm inviting a bunch of developers over, and we'll just have some burgers and maybe we'll talk shop or something like that. If you're a developer, that's a pretty appealing invitation, right? Like have a few burgers and meet some of my peers. And it doesn't have to be super costly. You could just tell people, bring your own burger or whatever. But I've found there's tremendous value in just creating opportunities for people to connect and just sort of scratching my own itch, right? And that can be as simple or as complicated as you want to make it, right?
I do agree on the burgers part. That's what I do for pretty much all of my social events. I do find, however, that the bring your own burger strategy rarely, if ever, works. But
yeah, I wouldn't recommend it unless you're like really strapped for cash and you can't afford a box of burgers.
Yeah, but in general, it's great. More like bring your own bottles. That's usually a good time. What about starting up new connections and finding new people to connect with? You already mentioned, like, if I'm a programmer, I can head to all of these events. But as I said earlier, I do find that's not really my crowd. So what's left? what alternatives are there?
Well, I guess it depends. I guess it depends on your intention for the connections you want, right? Are you looking to connect with your peers because you want to learn from them? Are you looking to connect with people who might become customers? Are you looking to meet up with some potential friends? They all kind of lead to different strategies, right? And so if I've, for instance, I've moved to a new city and I don't know very many people, and I want, I need some social connections. Or if I'm, if I'm an introvert and I'm starting to realize, hey, maybe I need to like get out a little bit more. Obviously, like starting with the things that you love, your hobbies. If you love wake surfing, find out where wake surfers are hanging out. And there's undoubtedly events, whether it's Facebook groups or Meetup.com or whatever. It's harder if you're in a smaller town, of course, but if you're in a big enough city, there's going to be groups of just about anything, like a bullfighters association in your city or something like that. Like there's just so many groups and so many points of connection for people these days. You can pick the most esoteric interest and thing and connect with people there, and just find your tribe. But again, like bringing it back to try not to look at it as a relationship where you're taking, but rather you're looking for relationships where you can give, where you can create value for other people. And if you approach your relationships from that perspective, you will A, have more rewarding and richer relationships, and B, you will probably get more in the long run. And I love that I have this mentor, Charles Eisenstein. He's a writer and philosopher, and I really love his way of thinking about things. And he talks a lot about bringing the world back into the web of relationships, because as we've become more affluent, it's become easier and easier for us to just not rely on other people and just buy everything we need. We can just order all of our food and all of our needs right to our front door. We never have to even see another person, so we don't really rely on people except for this invisible web of things. And he talks about bringing ourselves back into the web of relationship that we used to live in for 99.8% of our life. And one of the examples he gives that I love, he talks about his Amish friend. And in the typical Amish community, there's no such thing as home insurance. If your house burns down, you don't get a check from the insurance company. The community builds you a house. And the premium payments you make on that insurance are all the times that you built houses for other people, or fixed somebody's deck, or bake them a cake or whatever. And in a community like that, it's based on this web of relationships where people are all giving to each other, and not necessarily with an expectation of reward or return, but that's how it just works out. And so I think when you're starting, I think that's a good principle to keep in mind, is looking for opportunities to give and create value and be of service to other people. And I'll just tell you one final story. When I moved back to Toronto from the Canadian Rockies, I'd moved from this beautiful, picturesque mountain town where I was mountain biking and skiing all the time back to the big city. And it was kind of a little bit scary. And a lot of the people that I knew here when I left were now older, and they had kids, and they didn't have time for me. And it was quite a lonely time that first year or two. I became quite depressed. And one of the most powerful things I did was I started volunteering. And I started volunteering for an organization that did support for people with cancer and their caregivers. My father died of cancer when I was 16, so that was a really, really rewarding experience for me, not only because of the opportunity to give back, but also just the connections that I made there were like really real and wonderful and raw, and I didn't approach that from any perspective other than I have some time, I want to give back. And it ended up being, for me, probably more rewarding than the other people. So,
Yeah, I find in business it's very similar in working with people. I always try to find a way to help somebody. Sometimes you can help in little ways. And if you don't have a lot of resources, your time and your advice can help people. And I've just found that if I can help people either by connecting them to the right people or helping them figure out a solution to a problem, it always comes back someday later. And even if it doesn't, you at least feel good about yourself and the contribution that you have made, right?
It's the ultimate happiness hack. And being of service and giving to others is just an amazing way to feel good about yourself and feel happier.
Yes.
Mike, I absolutely agree with you. Like, one of the most important things in life is to give. Not necessarily more than we take, but that is a good thing to aim for. At least I believe so. Mm-hmm. What I do find difficult is actually taking from people or accepting their giving. I'm sure that you've met many people with this issue. I mean, the thing is, whenever I give, I'm like, oh yeah, this feels great, this is awesome. But whenever I'm offered some help, even emotional or financial, I just feel absolutely terrible. What would you recommend to people like me to work on this a bit?
Well, it's interesting. Like I've heard that, I hear that all the time. I think part of it stems from this cult of individuality that we've been force-fed and brought into this idea of going it alone, the heroic individual battling the elements and battling the world alone. And
that's the stoic Greek hero.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate, because that is not how humans have lived up until very recently. If you tried to go it alone, you died. You relied on your tribe of people around you to survive the elements, to survive predators, whatever. And so for most of our history, we've relied on each other people, and it's only in the last few centuries, especially, where we've kind of gotten into this idea of like, I have to go it alone. And one of my missions is to remove the notion that help is a four-letter word. It is, of course, a four-letter word, but not a pejorative one. And asking for help is how we humans have gotten by for hundreds of thousands of years. And I guess what I would say to that, I can tell you a story that might illustrate my purpose. And what I would say to that is that asking for and receiving help is actually a gift to the other person. And we just talked about, how good it feels to be able to give and be of service. And so when we sort of deny that, or we energetically deny that, and we're not appreciative because of whatever psychological hang-ups we have, we're denying the other person a gift. And so I'll tell you the story. About a month ago, a friend of mine reached out to me and just sent me a text message and said, hey, I'm kind of wrestling with something and not really sure what to do about it. Do you have any time to get together? And I texted him back and said, yeah, let's get together this afternoon. I have some free time. And we got together for a coffee, and it was this professional challenge that he was kind of stuck on. And so, and this is also maybe a little side note, I focus really just on listening to him and asking some questions rather than giving him outright advice, because I tend to take the perspective that we already have our own sources of wisdom. We don't need other people to give us advice, because they don't necessarily know the full context. So my focus was just being there with him, listening intently, asking him some questions. And then afterwards, he felt like he'd been able to kind of energetically move through a lot of this stuff and maybe have some clarity. And afterwards, I felt really great that that he honored our friendship by reaching out to me in his time of need, and B, that I was able to provide him with my presence and maybe a few good questions, stuff like that. And so it was actually a really good gift to me. And I tried to, because I could tell that he was a little bit uneasy about asking for help as well. And so I told him afterwards, I said, hey, listen, I really value that you reached out to me and that you value our friendship. And B, I'm super grateful that I was able to, give you some of my time. And so I just don't want you to feel like you're taking something from me. You're actually giving me something. And so I think that's a useful reframe, is that when we're asking for help, we are actually giving another person the opportunity to be of service. And that generally feels good for most people. And, you can, of course, take that too far, where you're just like being a burden on somebody and constantly dipping into the well and taking. But in just,
Yep.
in the odd opportunity, when we're asking, we're potentially creating a gift for the other person. Does that make sense?
Honestly, that's really
Does it feel like a
puts things
useful
into
reframe?
perspective. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I got pretty emotional just listening to your explanation. Never even considered thinking about it this way. But yeah, I'll try to internalize that, and that's just such a unique way of looking at things. Like, I mean, just basically asking for help is, as you and I said, is typically considered a burden on the other person. And truly, I never even considered.
But
Yeah.
there are many people. I mean, I love
Same.
helping people. I think it's great if I'm more useful than holding open the door for my daughter to walk through, then great, you know. So if I can help somebody, it feels good. And if I offer to give something or to help someone, and you know, my wife is of different culture, and they're, you know, part of their culture is, well, if you're giving a gift, that you make a show of no, please don't, and you know, and that gets a little awkward and hard, right? And there, you know, you just have to assume that the people that are offering you help or actively trying to assist you or provide help, they enjoy it. They realize the benefit they get from helping, and they enjoy doing it. So why not let them, right? They wouldn't offer it unless they truly wanted to.
And then when they do offer their help, it's just being gracious and accepting that and being appreciative and thanking them for it. You know, that kind of thing of like, oh no, you shouldn't have, and no, I can't accept it. I mean, it's, you know, somebody is giving to you from their heart, and then when you're sort of saying no, it's kind of a bit of an insult, right? And you know, I get that certain cultures develop that way, but I think it's important to accept gifts with grace.
You know, we've kind of talked about how do you kind of start building a network? How do you make connections? What are the things that are important in building relationships? Maybe we can get in a little bit, you know, about the technical side. You know, I build a lot of relationships each week. If I have an issue, it's I don't have enough time or enough bandwidth to just keep maintaining those relationships. It's an ever expanding kind of network, right? So part of that is, what are some of the hacks and tips and tricks to kind of making sure you stay in contact with everybody? What are some of the tools you use? You must have a fairly large network. How do you make sure you're staying in contact and you know, being available to people and helping people and that type of thing?
Well, I guess there's two things. One is strategies, and the other is tools and technology and stuff like that. And so maybe I'll come at the strategy part of it first. I already sort of touched on that. Is like actually blocking off time in your calendar, right? And I find it's best to try and batch this type of stuff, and so that, you know, if I have time blocked off 2 days a week for calls, Zoom calls with people, because they're not in my town and I can't meet up with them personally. And so, you know, on Tuesdays I'll have 4 or 5 back-to-back calls with people. It's kind of hard to go back and forth between having a call and then doing some other work and then back to a call. And so batching that stuff is important. The other part of it is the technology. So I use Airtable. It does function as a CRM tool. It's not the greatest CRM tool, but I use it because I use it for a whole bunch of other stuff for which it's amazing. And so rather than using Airtable plus a separate CRM, I just use Airtable as my CRM. So CRM stands for Customer Relationship Management, or you could say Connection Relationship Management. And so they're better CRM tools for just maintaining connections. But basically I have a database, Airtable, all the people that I want to stay connected with. And then sometimes I will rate the strength of the relationship, and which also informs how much do I want to invest in that relationship. I'm not going to invest the same into every relationship, right? And so my closest friends or my best customers, I'm going to invest more time into them than somebody else who I don't have the same level of relationship with. I will also track when is the last time that we connected, so I have a field for that. I also will track, there's another field for what was our last connection? Was it a phone call? Was it a Zoom call? Was it a coffee? Was it a lunch? Was it a dinner? That kind of stuff. And then that informs, when am I going to reach out to them again? And so this is all now managed by my assistant, and she reaches out to, when enough time has elapsed since I've seen somebody, she'll reach out to them and say, hey, Mike would love to connect with you. And and the follow up to that is that can seem a little bit like, oh, look who's so big for their britches, they don't have time to, email me for a get together. They're handing it off to their assistant. But I make it very clear to those people that I want to invest my time in the connection, not the admin of the connection, right? And it just gives me more time to be fully present with them. And so that's kind of the technology. And obviously, I think a tool like a calendar scheduling tool like Calendly, I use Mixmax because it combines email and calendar functionality, but a tool like that is kind of a given, right? You don't want to be emailing back and forth to find a time in a date. Just like, here's a link to my calendar, book a time. So for me, I have time in my calendar set up for calls. Tuesday, Thursday mornings are my coffee time, so people can book a slot on Tuesday or Thursday morning to have a coffee with me. And then Tuesday and Thursday are also my lunch meeting. So if somebody wants to book a lunch with me, and so that that pretty much manages most of it. The other, I guess, piece of technology is just plain old phone and text messaging. So I will often, when I have a bit of time, like this morning, I was walking the dog in the park, and a couple of my friends came to mind, and I just sent them a quick little voice message and say, hey, I'm thinking of you. I appreciate you. I appreciate our friendship. And, the important thing is to be genuine about this. You don't want to just be doing this as an exercise. I genuinely appreciate the people that I reached out to this morning. And I was also very specific about the things that I do appreciate them and about our friendship. And so that's a pretty, these days, a pretty common and low-tech technology. It's just sending people text messages and voice messages to tell them you appreciate them, which feels really good on the receiving end, but also feels really good on the sender end, because it's sort of creating a culture of gratitude in your life and reminding yourself why you're grateful for these things. And then the final thing I would say about that is, like, don't get too over reliant on technology. One of my favorite things to do is just to do walking phone calls with people, where I just put on my headphones, I'll go for a walk, and I'll invite them to do the same. And we don't have Zoom or any other complicated software. It's just a phone call, and and meeting over a coffee is not a technology. It's just two people talking as well. So those are a few things I would say. And it's for me, it's not a huge amount. It's probably between the lunches and the coffees and the calls, it's probably about 7 hours of my week, which I guess is a fair bit, but it is probably the most valuable thing I do as a business owner, is maintaining and nurturing those connections. And the other thing too is, if you're relying on referrals, when you're constantly meeting with people and staying top of mind, then they are probably on the look. When they see somebody that might make a good referral and you just had coffee with them the day before, you're top of mind, and they're like, oh, you should talk to Mike. So it's a valuable business strategy as well as just personally fulfilling.
Do you have any tips, like if you're, you haven't talked to somebody in 6 months or a year, and you're just reaching out to them to say hi, what are some of the topics or the things that you look to try to discuss with them to keep that relationship strong, or to build it even stronger?
Mm-hmm. Well, I touched on this earlier. I was talking about like interesting conversation starters, like at an event, but that can also go like if you're reaching out to somebody that you haven't connected with in a while. The two questions I touched on, like, what's exciting for you these days? And people generally have, even if their life is really challenging or whatever, they probably have something that they're excited about, or something that they're working on or striving towards. Or you could ask, like, what's a big dream you're working towards, or something like that. That tends to open up some pretty good responses, and it's a good starting point. And the other one is, what's a challenge that you're dealing with, or something you're stuck on. And people can kind of take that, at whatever depth they feel comfortable, because most people, I find, at least through my events, most people are dealing with, at least one pretty significant challenge in their life. And sometimes a question like that can open up a really heartfelt, deep response, which then invites a really, potentially deep conversation and a very connecting conversation. Or maybe they're not comfortable going there and they'll talk about something else, but it's usually a pretty good starting point for a connection. And so, if you wanted to kind of reopen a communication with somebody you haven't connected with in a while, you could just send them an email and ask them, hey, you can just say, hey, I was thinking about you, just wondering how you're doing, wondering what's exciting for you these days. And that might be a great starting point, and you can take it wherever you want from there. And if they respond and take your invitation, you could say, hey, this sounds really cool. I'd love it. Let's hop on a call and discuss this further, or, whatever you want with that.
Well, I think if you're right with it, we could move on to strengthening those connections, or how we can strengthen those connections. Because we have discussed that building a network requires both giving and receiving support. And how should we find a balance between giving and seeking help?
Yeah, great question. I guess one thing I would say prior to that is I would encourage people to go deep before they go wide. So rather than trying to, manage 200 different connections and you're not really doing a very good job of any of them, and you're not responding to emails for a couple of days, or somebody sends you a voice message and you don't get back to it for 3 days because you're overwhelmed, just focus on, a handful of people and really nurturing those connections before you start going wide. And, I like I said, there are a few connections in my life that I try to go very deep and try to continually nurture those, and then others that I won't invest as much time in. But, that balance of giving and taking, my personal perspective on that is just, I focus on the giving part and trying to identify opportunities for me to create value in other people's lives. And then I know that just by the way that humans work, that they're going to, if they receive value from what I've given them, they're going to want to, identify opportunities to give value in return to me, whether I ask for it or not. And that's not, it's not a hard and fast rule for every single person, but I found it to be pretty widely repeated. It's an experiment that's been repeated many times, let's say. So I tend to focus on giving first. And, and for me, I find, because I've now got a pretty extensive network, one of the easiest ways for me to give is to connect people. And so sometimes I will ask people, if they're dealing with a particular challenge or whatever, I will ask them, hey, is there any type of person or connection that you think would be valuable in helping you solve this problem? And that's very easy. It's, if I know the right person to connect them with, that's a few minutes of my time, but that could unlock a whole world of possibility for that person. And I'll just do a little side note on that. Just in terms of introductions, I'm a big fan of the so-called double opt-in introduction. And so, Botond, if you didn't know Dave and I thought you should meet Dave, rather than sending you an email saying, hey, Botond and Dave, you guys should meet each other, I'm kind of putting the work in your court, and you may or may not want to pursue that, but then you feel this pressure. And so I would then reach out to Dave and say, hey, Dave, there's this guy Botond that I think you should chat with. I think it'd be, you could offer him something valuable. Are you interested in the introduction? And then Dave has the option to, opt in or out, rather than if I just make the introduction, Dave almost has no choice unless he's okay with, being seen as rude, right? So again, my focus
those
is
can get awkward really quick.
Yeah. And so again, my focus is on the giving part, but also, as we chatted about, if you really need help, ask for it, and ask for it when you need it. But if you focus, as I have, on creating value and giving, I feel that I now have a very rich network of people to whom I've given, to whom I've created value, people that I can turn to if I really need it, because I put that focus on the giving. And undoubtedly, it will come back to you. Maybe not in the ways that you think it will, and not directly or financially or whatever, but it will come back to you when you invest in those relationships, and it'll just feel really good in the process. And sometimes the giving is just, hey, let's hang out and have a beer or something like that. Maybe that's just what they need right now, and that is a act of giving to somebody else, is just to spend time with them, right?
Yeah, I didn't know it was called double opt-in. I just naturally kind of do that.
Yeah, neither did I.
So, yeah, interesting. And I've noticed, there's a lot of automation for outreach. The biggest issue I have with it is it's pretty obvious that the outreach is really, I want to talk to you about business, right? I'm outreaching for you to connect so we can talk about our business.
Yeah.
But sometimes I feel like, okay, well, why is this person acting like he's a friend of mine or a knowledgeable person, but then he's just saying, I just want to talk business? Aren't there other things to talk about, right? So some of that automation can be done kind of in an awkward way.
LinkedIn is the worst. LinkedIn is the worst for that.
Yeah, LinkedIn, is it a curse or a blessing? I still try to figure that out, right?
I mean,
my LinkedIn inbox is definitely a curse.
have you guys ever had anything positive come out of LinkedIn?
I mean, I use LinkedIn, for some people like using it. Like some of the podcasts that we do, I set it up completely on LinkedIn, right? But other people just don't want to do it. I mean, I have like, I don't know, 6,000 connections or something like that. I mean, my LinkedIn is just one long daily spam, right? I'm just getting spammed by everyone. It's hard to even see if somebody interesting or somebody who really wants to connect with me or somebody I actually know is like, okay, trying to communicate with me. It's sometimes hard. It's bad enough on email when I'm getting 200, 300 emails a day. I don't know. Is there any tool that helps make LinkedIn usable?
Yeah, I don't know. Ignore your inbox.
Well, I mean, organizing personal events, I've always liked going to small networking events. That's always been the way I've kind of built relationships. I did a lot of trade shows for many years, every month or every other month going to a large trade show, and I build relationships that way. But I have found that it's easier, like you said, to kind of slow down a little bit and focus on how am I building quality relationships. Things like this podcast, I've actually built some pretty decent relationships out of just podcast guests because we actually get to know each other because we're having an hour or so to talk about things. But also all kinds of other ways that I've been meeting people. And, this philosophy is spend some time to get to know the person, forget about the business side of it, just find out who they are as a person and how can you help them and, what can you learn from them. That seems to be the best philosophy for at least on my side.
100%. Yeah. And those will undoubtedly lead to much better business connections when you're connecting as humans rather than, transactions, right? And too many people, I think, look at relationships as a transaction rather than an opportunity to connect.
Yeah, I mean, I'll admit when I was doing a lot of sales in the gaming industry, I literally, I was meeting so many people, everything was transactional. I only had one goal, which was, okay, to make a business transaction. And I think that dehumanizes not just the people that you're meeting, but also yourself. And after a while, I found it very unsatisfying, right? Even when I was hitting my goals and doing what I needed to do, I find that trying to, if the goal of the relationship is to sell something, it's not a very meaningful relationship to begin with.
Like if you're a sales rep or something like that, think about the difference between you going into that transaction or that meeting or whatever you're doing with a goal of selling something versus going into that meeting, conversation, whatever, with a goal of understanding that person, who they are, what keeps them up at night, what are their hopes and dreams, stuff like that. Maybe you only have 15 minutes and you can't cover all of that, but that person, like one of our core needs as humans is to feel seen and heard. And a lot of us don't get that on a very regular basis. And if you give somebody an opportunity to feel seen and heard, they're probably going to look at that relationship in a very different light than if you're just trying to sell them something. Probably in the end, they will trust you more. You're more likely to make the sale. Maybe because you're actually focused on their interests and their problems or whatever, and maybe you have some opportunities to create value, they might become a lifetime customer because of your focus on them as a human being rather than a transaction. So just a different way of thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, in your opinion, what is the future of networking?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It's obviously these days, AI is very much on people's minds, and particularly, people focusing on doomsday scenarios and AI is going to kill all these jobs or it's going to kill us all. And I feel very blessed to be in the industry and have the type of company I have that is focused on building deep, genuine connections between people, because I know that that's not something AI can replicate. And I think, people will develop relationships with their AI assistants, much like that movie Her. But it's a poor substrate for really genuine human-to-human connection. And there's all kinds of studies and data that show that, what the neurochemical release that happens between two people who are deeply bonded, that doesn't happen online or doesn't happen, in a relationship with a chatbot, for instance. And I think as we go further and further down this technology path, that those human connections are going to be more and more valuable to people, because they'll become, we're getting sucked further into the technology matrix, where, my big struggle these days is trying to keep my teens off apps and social media and off their devices, because I can see the detrimental effect it has on their health. And so it's really just about trying to mitigate that and manage that, because the more they get sucked in, the more they have this sense that something is lacking in life, and then they think they can solve it by spending more time on social media or whatever. And so human connection, I think, is going to become more and more important. And I think the people and the companies and organizations that can provide that can provide opportunities. And I can tell you for myself, and especially as we're, coming out of COVID and this period of disconnection, people are starved for human connection more than ever. And if you can provide that to them, they will come to the well and they will drink deeply of it. And I think, and so many of my peers in the event industry are now approaching their events very differently, where they are putting the focus on human connection, and they're realizing the old model of like information isn't really that valuable to people, because you get some guy on a stage and he's giving the same talk that you can just watch on his YouTube channel. That's not that valuable. But if I have the opportunity to connect with one of my peers or connect with that guy, who's normally on stage, that's hugely valuable to me. And so I think the future of networking is more and more people putting intentionality between helping people forge deep, meaningful connections, just because, from a strictly market standpoint, there's a huge demand. And whenever there's a huge demand, supply will eventually come in. And so I look forward to seeing that,
Mike, thank you so much for helping us explore building personal business networks. Well, that's about all the time we have for this episode today. But before you go, dear audience, you might want to consider this important question.
How are you going to get your personal network to be beneficial to everyone in your network?
For our listeners, please subscribe and click the notifications to join us for our next ScreamingBox Technology and Business Rundown podcast. Until then, meet someone new and grow your network. Thank you very much for taking this journey with us. Join us for our next exciting exploration of technology and business in the first week of every month. Please help us by subscribing, liking, and following us on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and please let us know any subjects or topics you would like us to discuss in our next podcast by leaving a message for us in the comment sections or sending us a Twitter DM. Till next month, please stay happy and healthy.